Hello, hello.
It's Masters of Podcasting. I'm Melissa.
I'm Conley.
And we're back for Season 2. We're going to talk about Episode 1, Parallax.
This is like the Seinfeld episode. The chronology just goes all over the place.
Yeah. I had to shuffle it all together and kind of write it out in little bits and pieces and put it back together again before I could really kind of start to flesh out what I thought about it. And it sort of starts to piece together little things that the characters say when Ginny says things like, I would take care of myself first. It's all you can do. That kind of comes with the experience that she's had so far in being back with Bill and kind of where she sees herself going. So it really kind of helps to think about this step by step. But I think it was very inventive of them to shuffle it out of order and have flashbacks and things like that.
Well, and I think it allowed them to tell a much more complex and rich story than they otherwise would have gotten to tell. Because if you tried to work this into a single episode and just did straight progression of the day after, a couple weeks after, 4 weeks after, it would have felt like so much being crammed in. But because they decided just to screw with the chronology, there's still so much to work with, but you spend so much of the episode just trying to parse out what's most important, and a lot of the big moments are able to land in a way I don't think they would if it was just straight line.
Right, because if we follow the chronology step by step, the way a show normally would, it wouldn't end on as much of a, cliffhanger. The resolution or the end of the episode would not have been as interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this was a very risky move for them, but one that definitely paid off.
I think putting the actual episodes ending the way that they did forces you to go back and rewatch the episode again and again to figure out how these pieces fit together and how each part's weight bears on other parts that have come before and after.
And I would say, too, it helps you search for even the smaller pieces which influence the big decisions and the big moments that happen in this episode. For example, because this is the first thing I have in my notes, is talking about Bill and Barton. When Bill is talking to Barton after the electroshock treatment, he's saying, I don't really think you should do this. There's no really proven data that says, electroshock cures homosexuality. And that happens to be the same night in which Barton decides it's a great idea to try and seduce Margaret with disastrous results.
Mm.
So it's stuff like that where, the little bits and pieces that trickle in throughout that and are scattered, you get to see how they influence what happen to be the huge decisions.
Very true. So let's start off by talking about, and I really want to focus mostly on the differences in Bill's and Ginny's perspectives on the flashbacks. And we're going to talk about this sort of generally in, I guess, chronological order, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Kind of its general influence. So Bill gets the first flashback, so we'll talk about him first. I think the biggest difference that the show sets up in how they each react is in what both of them focus on in their memories and what their subconscious is telling them by the act of flashing back in the first place, and sort of what their mental purpose is in going to this place where they return to what happened on the night of the Man-High events. So for Bill, he focuses entirely on the sex, and both of them, of course, have a moment where they're thinking about how intense and how good it was. But Bill tends to return to that in a way that Ginny kind of moves on from, which is interesting. But I noticed that Bill focuses on their reunion and sort of the silent, unspoken forgiveness that kind of passes between them, because he mentally notes that instead of, and commenters have noted this, instead of coming in and ripping off her clothes and, making demands of her, he just sort of leans into her and holds on. And he goes very carefully through the foreplay that he goes into. And it's almost like you could almost see it as self-congratulatory, like Wow, yeah, I was really good at that. Look at me doing all that stuff for her. That was
I'm
awesome.
so awesome.
I'm so awesome. But Jenny, on the other hand, and it gets a little Rashomon in parts, which is great. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, Rashomon was a famous Japanese movie where the characters remembered the same event from different perspectives and with different, not different outcomes, but kind of different details, which is sort of essentially what a parallax is. This has been talked a lot about. It's looking at the same object from different perspectives, but with the same outcome. And it was really funny to me that Jenny remembered that she remembered it as Bill incessantly ringing the doorbell, which we know for a fact he just knocked very quietly, but for some reason in her head it's just this constant ringing. She almost completely skips the foreplay and goes straight into when she's in the response cycle on the plateau stage, and she kind of stays there. And her subconscious very carefully takes note of how he pins her arms back, but she doesn't really comment on it. And that, I texted you, and it made me think of Stan's dream in The Americans, where he dreams that Martha, the FBI secretary, is stealing files. So his subconscious is aware of it, but he hasn't quite processed it yet. And I felt there was a parallel there. Her deep subconscious is concerned about that, or at least takes note of it, but it doesn't really surface in their pillow talk. So I felt like that was the biggest difference between the two of them. What did you think of their sex scene?
Well, I mean, like you said, it was interesting what each person really chose to focus on, especially considering they have so many flashbacks to that particular scene when, like you pointed out earlier, at this point throughout the episode, they have had multiple trysts and been to the hotel several times. And so, obviously there should be a little bit more to draw from, but this particular night was so laden with just emotion and raw, physical feeling that it just keeps coming back to them again and again.
And it's interesting that this is essentially the last time that they can consider themselves to be on the same page, because neither one of them have out and out lied to each other about their intentions again. And they both know that they're lying. It's kind of the last pure, innocent moment that they have together in a way, because they've been lying about the work and the study, and then there's just this raw emotion, and then they both scuttle the whole thing again. So it's like, I think they keep coming back to that, even though they've had other sessions with each other, just because of the purity of that moment.
Well, and I think too, not just the purity, but the fact that there was acknowledgement that, we need each other. It's not just because of the study, it's not just because of the work, it's not just because, I'm lonely or you're unhappy. There is commonality between us, there is chemistry, and, we like that.
Might as well act on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the most, I guess, the simplest that their relationship has ever been at that point, even though the emotional factors leading to that moment, and of course spiraling after that moment, are so ridiculously and needlessly complicated.
That's true. And then, of course, there is the very interesting, very, I guess it's like a spotlight beam now that you think about it. But when I was first watching this episode, I was live tweeting, and I missed the fact that they never kissed. And now it's like this really big deal, and everyone who's watched the show is focusing on this. Like, when are they gonna do this?
Well, I think too, one of the things that made it stand out for me, even on first watch, was because there's that moment, I forget whose flashback it is, I think it may have been Ginny's, where, Bill's just sort of, like, completely lost, trying to really, I guess, plan his next move in the middle of things, and then Ginny puts her hand on his face, and he stops, and it really, there's that pause, and they lock eyes in that moment of, okay, this is the moment. And then Bill turns his head away and, kisses her neck instead.
Well, and it wasn't just that he didn't really choose to go over there, because she tilts her chin back, like she really thinks it's going to happen, and she really does. And then this long pause goes by, and the moment passes, and she very resignedly turns her head to the side and offers up her neck, and the look on her face, if you can see it, because it's really dark, is so disappointed.
Well, and I think that's something that's going to come up again, maybe even overtly later in the season, but if not overtly, then probably just subconsciously, maybe in one of those things where, he keeps nudging her to get her to tilt her head and she won't, or she just keeps, looking at him or putting her hand on his face, something. Like, it's going to come up.
And it makes me wonder if in their subsequent trysts, if he does the same thing, like prevents her from essentially having sexual agency over him, because it takes away a large part of who Ginny is, because we've heard from other characters that Ginny is so involved, and so she gives directions and she tells, men what to do, and she's just very very active in the sexual process. And here,
Right.
for him to just pin her down and just basically force her out of it is very strange. And it must be, I think that would get frustrating for her after a while.
Well, I think the fact that they're not, that she's not able to give him direction the way that she would and has with other men, that's a pretty clear indicator of their relationship, because, they don't communicate in the way that they should. And so, sometimes that'll work out, but then sometimes it's just going to lead to these terribly awkward moments where you're staring at someone, then you just have to turn your head to the side, like, okay, I guess this is happening.
And she chases him down. Like, eventually, I think he lets go of her arms, and she keeps turning her head to the side to be like, hey, come here. And he keeps, like, moving further and further away from her, like, tilting practically off the bed. He's desperate to get away from her and be really close to her at the same time.
Sounds just like Bill.
Pretty much. So that was good. That was a nice, and because I think originally Michelle Ashford had plans to just go ahead and jump forward to the early 1960s for season 2, and a lot of people, kind of were giving her the look and being like, don't you think you should at least tell people what happened that night? Because I don't think that's going to be very satisfying if you just leave it up to people's imaginations. Like, that's not a cliffhanger that you just leave to the imagination.
Well, I think, too, if she hadn't at least given them this moment, then everything that happens this season, no matter how dramatic it gets, essentially it's going to be about miscommunication and
misunderstanding
each person holding things back, and resentment and just tension. And so if you don't at least have one, not pure moment, but at least generally pleasant moment where the two of them have come to some accord, how can you really stand to watch the rest of the season when there's always going to be that high level of conflict?
Right, because you're just going to hope that they get back to this. So Bill, really, both of his flashbacks focus on the intensity of the sex, how good it was. He completely avoids thinking about the fact that he avoids kissing her. Like, that doesn't appear in his flashbacks. Ginny has to fill that in later. And then, tellingly, I think Ginny only focuses on the sex once. She moves on and thinks about the immediate aftermath. And her second flashback goes into, so now what? She's very a forward-moving type, whereas Bill, as he's having these flashbacks, their purpose is to help him escape from the absolute hell that his life has become with this new baby that he doesn't want and didn't consent to, whereas Ginny is thinking about the future. And I think we'll talk about their conversation in the hotel at the end of the podcast, but I think she's, really reflecting on whether or not she genuinely wants to go back to working with Bill. Not that she doesn't enjoy the work, but she's considering it and she's weighing it.
It subconsciously landed for Bill because when Jenny, in that second flashback, she comes back into the room after the phone call with Ethan and says, so now what? Which is essentially what Bill sort of throws at Essie when they're in the middle of their argument. So I think, in a sense, some of that has landed, whether Bill would like it to or not, or whether he wants to acknowledge it, but obviously he's going to do his best to just pretend it isn't happening.
And I think partly it's landed because Jenny tips her hand in that hotel conversation, and I think he feels at a later date like that's just the reality that he has to live with. So do you want to move on, or do you have anything else to say about this?
Let's move on.
Okay, so do you want to talk about Barton? Do you want to talk about Libby, Essie, and the baby?
Let's talk about Libby, Essie, and the baby.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting that right away with Libby, we see her standing up for herself to a further degree than we did last season. Because, like, when she goes in for the checkup with, and I forget this doctor's name, but the terrible doctor who compares Bill to the murderer. This pediatrician is just blabbing on and on about how terrible Bill is and blah, 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 and how embarrassed she must be and how she didn't know what she was getting into. And she looks at him and just snaps right up and goes, my husband is a first-class obstetrician. He has more degrees than you could ever get in your life. And it's pretty sassy from a Libby who last season pretty much existed to placate others and to make sure that everyone was comfortable.
And I think it's not only because Libby finally has what she wanted, she feels like she's coming into her great purpose in life, but it's also because she's attached her wagon to Bill and Bill has let her down, and she is taking it, like, if she's going to be attached to this guy, by God, she's going to make sure that his status and her established way of life are going to be maintained.
Well, and I think, too, it's notable that while she does stand up for herself and tries to get Bill to move in the direction she thinks is necessary, such as, getting a job and providing for their family, she doesn't stand up to him to a certain point. So, when he has the big blowout with Essie and says, you're going to have to hire somebody, I'm going to leave for a few hours, I guess you can do that, by the way, they should start tomorrow. She doesn't scream at him or demand that he fix what had gone wrong. She just kind of watches him helplessly.
It is, you and I have both read the biography now, and it is a very accurate detail that Libby was very much a social networker. She worked those parties like you wouldn't believe, and Bill doesn't have those same connections. So when they are at a later point in life, and spoiler alert, when they separate, he's not going to have those same connections, and people are going to side with Libby. So I think that's an interesting setup. They're kind of setting up the fact that Libby is the one willing to go out and play nice with, the society women in order to get what they need as a family.
And I think, too, Libby, for all her faults, is very aware how this game is played, and she knows what she's doing because she knows, the parties to go to and the people to talk to and who you have to throw a couple bones now and again just to really get your name out there and to make sure that your name is maintained in this insular community.
It is very interesting to me that Libby, they go to this party right after Libby visits the hospital for the baby's checkup, and Libby asks Ginny for advice on what she should do to get Bill back to work, and Ginny says, take care of yourself first. And Libby's response is to go and network and basically be the, public relations person for her husband. It's a very interesting interpretation of Ginny's advice.
It's something that not only she knows how to do, but she does well and is very confident in. She's not the type to just sit around and maybe do something sort of tiny. She's looking for the things that matter and the things that are going to, like you said, support her family.
Yeah, and I think Ginny's advice, if Ginny were taking Ginny's own advice, and I think she kind of is here, because she says this after she's had a few episodes at the hotel with Bill. I think it's kind of a reflection of the fact that she is taking her work seriously, and she's coming back to this relationship ostensibly for the work. She's taking care of herself first. She's got her career. And Libby's career essentially is promoting her husband. So it's just two very different sides of the same coin.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree.
So do we want to talk about the fact that Bill just straight up tells Essie that he's screwing Ginny on the regular?
And then cries afterward? Yes.
And that just blew my mind that he was so upfront with her on that.
Well, and I think it was obviously Ann Dowd, can't stay with the show this season.
She's on every show on TV right now, every one.
But I thought that was a really clever way of subverting expectations for that particular argument, because we saw last season Essie saying, you're going to turn into your father. I can see this connection between you and Virginia, and, you just don't go down that road. And then Bill, just to spite her, completely tosses it in her face. Not necessarily the first chance he gets, but pretty quick on the clutch.
Yeah.
I just like that it was something that wasn't necessarily languishing all season, like, oh no, Essie's going to find out. Essie's gonna know, and it just boom.
And especially the big loose end that would have been there if Essie and Libby had grown really close, if Essie had started to feel a need to come clean with Libby, because I think Libby is meant to just stay in the dark for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, again, Libby doesn't have really a network of people who are familiar with her situation enough to sort of pull her aside and say, look, girl, like, this is what your husband's up to.
You in danger, girl.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, yeah, she has people who she can network with and who are friendly to her and who eventually will be on her side, but, in the immediate sort of dangerous hour, she doesn't have anyone there who will tell her the truth.
Yeah. There was something else that I wanted to note here, and now I've completely forgotten. Oh, yes,
Bill?
you had that amazing realization. Tell everyone, because I think this is just great. I didn't pick up on this.
I guess it was when I was watching it, and after Bill and Essie have had this fight, and Libby comes back, and Bill's just sitting at his desk, just completely quiet and chastened. Libby comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, you're a baby magician. You've done this excellent thing." And then he sort of turns around and looks at her a little bit, and she goes, well, maybe it was Essie. You look very strange. What's going on? And you can see just in Michael Sheen's eyes this water where he looks like he's just going to start crying any minute now. But he just, obviously keeps it very under wraps and very stoic. But at the same time, you can tell just how much this fight affected him. I loved it.
It really did. I mean, I rewatched it while we were sitting here talking before the episode, and it really is. And he even reaches up to kind of rub his eyes as if he's tired, but he actually, you can see it, he wipes away the tears. He's really affected by the fact that he's had to essentially banish his mother.
And I think it tied in well to one of the later scenes was, when he goes out, he tells Libby he's going to go away for a few hours.
I think it's right afterward.
Yeah, and then he goes running, and we see him on the track. And he's just there leaning over the fence and just sucking in air, trying to breathe. And for me, I was pretty sure he was going to have some sort of breakdown just because the breathing and that movement just, it was very reminiscent of someone who was about to burst into hysterical sobbing. So
well, I think he kind of wasn't he? The noise he was making was not normal.
Yeah, no, that was definitely more than a running wheeze, yeah. I will say.
That was pretty intense.
Let's talk about LDP, because I feel like there's so much more to talk about with Barton, unfortunately, because although our LDP scenes are classic, I mean, she does get overshadowed. I never thought I would love a Stella impression as much as I loved Elaine's, but Lillian just took away that trophy and blew it out of the water.
I knew that you would love that. The minute that happened, I was like, I need to call Conley. What do you think of her black eye? Do you think it was actually caused by a medicine cabinet, or do you think, like, there were some commenters who were speculating, and I think this is a really, really interesting idea, that she has been getting drunk regularly to cope with the fact that she is literally on her last bit of life and fell down as a result of, like, blackout drunk.
See, I assumed fell down because, maybe the cancer was starting to affect her nervous system, but I think that is even more interesting. Because that explains the huge bottle of whiskey in her drawer, as well as just, I won't say recklessness, because as she said, she's never been reckless, but it's definitely, I would say the Lillian of a couple years back wouldn't have kept alcohol at work, even on the off chance that she wanted to drink there.
Yeah, I wonder, because when she took like one sip of the alcohol, and then all of a sudden she was slurring her words together, and that made me wonder if the alcohol was like having a bad effect because of the medication that she was taking. But now I don't know, because I think there's more possibility in her getting drunk regularly, and maybe even being drunk at work.
See, I assumed that again was some sort of side effect from the cancer, because I mean, it hadn't even been a couple of minutes since she had that sip.
Exactly.
And alcohol doesn't necessarily hit your blood that quickly unless you're doing, a shot or some larger amount.
Yeah.
So to me, it seemed like, again, here's where the cancer is going to start affecting, neural function and motor function and those kinds of things where, you just can't keep it under wraps at that point.
Yeah.
The verbal slip, I thought, was more telling of the fact that her cancer is getting to a place where she's just not going to be able to hide it from people.
I did like that this conversation held a callback to the pilot episode when Ginny lied to Bill about how she got her black eye, but then Ginny straight up, is honest and upfront with Lillian and says, well, that's what people say when there's, an abusive or jealous lover involved.
Well, and I like, too, how she, even bringing up that idea, saying, I know it's not from a medicine cabinet. It's never from a medicine cabinet. And then she gets that kind of panicked look like, I mean, if you're with a man who hits you, you can talk to me about it. She doesn't want to insult Lillian by saying she could never have a jealous lover. But at the same time, it's either, you have a jealous lover who abuses you, or you got that from some other terrible thing that I shouldn't know. So, compromise?
There was speculation that Lillian has a female lover out there somewhere.
I think that would be perfect, actually. She could have some sort of Boston marriage and, Ginny wouldn't find out until the funeral. That would actually make a lot of sense.
Well, and there's also the fact that when we got to see her file last season, I don't remember which episode it was, we got to see her file, and it specifically says, do you have sex with a partner? And the answer was yes. And it says, if so, gender of the partner, and that field was left blank.
Really?
Yes, it's really, if you go back and look at it, and she's had a pregnancy, but she's had no children.
That is interesting.
Lillian has a history, a very interesting one, and I hope we get into that. I think we will. Yeah, I think we definitely will. Lillian admonishing Ginny for hawking the speed pills. I like that she just thinks it's cool to go over and rummage through Ginny's desk and sit there waiting for her with 36 bottles of pills, to call her out. And then Ginny takes the opportunity to turn it around on her and be like, yeah, I have to do that because, you don't pay me enough.
I loved her dry assessment of the situation when Austin Langham comes crawling into their office in a panic.
And what does she say?
You've done our profession proud.
All right, it's inevitable. We have to talk about Barton.
Ugh.
Not that I don't appreciate this entire storyline, but as Mad Men fans, this brings us back to a very sensitive subject.
Ugh, so sad.
A double sigh. Well, we won't focus on it too much because Barton seems to have survived his suicide attempt, but still, that entire sequence was amazingly shot and acted.
Well, I think, too, this was one of the episodes that I saw, and obviously the Emmy nominations had just come out for this year, but I watched this episode and thought, my God, Beau Bridges, just resubmit and they'll give you an Emmy.
Yeah.
Don't worry about this year. You got it in the bag.
Yeah, and Allison Janney, too. The fact that I think he waits a couple of days to see if the ECT treatments have taken effect, and he goes in, and of course Margaret is sitting there reading Lolita because now her bedtime reading always seems to be connected to torrid, inappropriate affairs somehow.
Well, and what was funny about that, too, was that I read several recaps mentioning that they thought Barton was looking at the porn simply to get, jazzed up for the event, which was initiating the terrible sex. But I also wondered on first viewing whether he was looking at it in an attempt to see if the electroshock therapy had worked.
That's what I assumed. He was looking at it to see if he was still turned on by it.
Right. But a lot of people apparently took it another way, which is fine. That wasn't the impression that I got from first viewing, so.
I think last season, Margaret noted that wasn't Barton?
I think he was 18 when she was 8 or 10.
Okay, well, whatever. That's an interesting parallel, and we're just overusing the word interesting this episode. It's a curious parallel between their real life situation and the far more dramatic and far more inappropriate age gap between Humbert and Lolita. I was not expecting, jovial, go along to get along, happy-go-lucky Barton to just start screaming at Margaret at the end of the awkward, failed attempt at having sex with her. That just was a wake-up call.
Well, and I think we're meant to see that as one of the, beginning of the side effects from electroshock. Obviously, they're in a very, tense and frustrated place, having just tried to have sex, and it went so badly. You know, obviously Barton has never been I would say, cruel person, especially to Margaret, whom he views as just this amazing, perfect woman, despite the fact that he doesn't want her and isn't excited by her.
Yeah.
So I think we were meant to see that, like, you know, if he continued with the electroshock, he would have just turned, and it would have just, you know, made him into a much more angry, I would say, you know, lashing out person. I don't know, unless you saw it a different way. Did you see it as just, I mean, stress, or?
It didn't occur to me that it was perhaps a side effect of the ECT, but I can see what you're saying, that it might make him more irritable and more, like, have sudden mood swings. Or
Yeah,
at least,
that's what I was thinking.
Or at least amplified frustration. I guess, I don't know what excuses he's giving Margaret in order to hang around the house all morning in his pajamas while she and Vivian go shopping, but he just apparently hangs around, and he watched them from the window and then started making preparations to kill himself, and I guess it took him a while because they come back loaded up with stuff, and then he decides to go for it.
Well, and it was interesting. I'll say a different word. It was, I guess, curious that he waited until they got home, but also I thought, you know, you hear this thump in the background. My roommate happened to be doing something in the house at the time, and so I thought it was a gunshot. And at that point, I was just like, oh, shit, he's tried to kill himself.
Oh, no. See, I didn't see it coming from a mile away. It did not occur to me that he might try something. I genuinely thought it was going in a different direction.
And this is, I mean, again, last season I talked so much about, there were two moments where I thought, you know, if Barton really doesn't get his head on straight, he's just going to kill himself. And one of them was, you know, after Margaret found out, and, you know, she was telling him that she wanted a divorce, and he was just saying, no, you know, we can't divorce, we can't do that. I don't have anything if I don't have you. And then the other was when he was about to get fired, when he and Bill were in his office, and he just sort of goes into that mini depressive spiral of, well, I'm an old man, you know, you'll land on your feet, you'll be okay. And then he just almost gives up on the spot. So I guess it didn't surprise me that he would turn to suicide, like as sort of a last resort, darkest hour kind of thing. But oh my God, I still was traumatized by the timing and by the quickness of it, I guess.
I think it was the quickness of it that surprised me. I don't mean that I didn't see Barton attempting suicide in the broader perspective of the show itself, because given what Bill decides to focus the study on a couple of decades from now, it makes some sense for there to be some very real, possibly fatalistic drama surrounding someone who's gay at a time when it's, you know, socially unacceptable and even a mental illness. But
right.
Yeah, I just wasn't expecting it to be so soon. I don't know. I don't think I was expecting anything. I think I was just caught off guard by it a little bit. But when it started happening, it made sense, unfortunately.
I just can't help thinking that we're going to see Vivian go completely off the rails in the next few episodes.
She seems like she's well adjusted after her breakup with Ethan and her broken heart. Like, she's talking about the future, and she's talking about moving away, starting over, and you really get the feeling that this is just going to drive her to a very dark place, because now this is the only indication she has of there being something wrong in her family, and it's this extreme.
Well, and I think, too, you know, she's not only is this horrific thing happen that she had to physically prevent, you know, it's obvious, too, that I think her mother knows more than she's letting on. Obviously, Margaret is aware that they are having some heavy problems while Vivian is just completely in the dark. So I think maybe we might see fractures in that familial relationship between Margaret and Vivian, who until this point have been very close and very kind to each other.
What did you think about Bill's inability to go in and see Barton? I liked the scene that, you know, he comes to the door. He and Margaret really get along, and you get the sense that they are chummy with each other, and that she's kind of looked out for him in the past, and she sort of sees him as a favorite nephew or something, and he smiles at her, and he's very charming with her, but she won't let him in. What do you think is up with Barton? I mean, beyond the obvious.
I mean, I assumed it was the same day, so
it was. She was wearing the same dress.
So, I mean, the man's going to have ligature marks on his neck. He's probably just, like, completely screwed up. I didn't even really question that, like, Barton was choosing not to see people or, you know, really wasn't even interested in what was happening outside, you know, his own head.
Did you think maybe, because I kind of wondered if maybe the temporary, like, cut off of his air supply maybe caused him some brain damage?
See, I didn't think about that, but it definitely could have.
It's poignant that Bill and Margaret talk about the fact that Bill and Barton have worked with each other for 20 straight years. She seems to almost be regretful of the fact that she can't let him in and make him aware, because she doesn't know that Bill knows, obviously. She doesn't know that Bill's been involved with this. But
And I think, too, you know, like, if Bill had been a more socially aware person, he wouldn't have just picked up on the fact that, like, okay, something unspecified is wrong, but, you know, something is wrong with Barton on this particular night. I don't know, because it's like they're probably 2 maybe missteps away from Bill being like, no, seriously, what's wrong with Barton? Like, why can't I see him?
Well, and I think the previous 4 episode 2 have Ginny and Bill talking about how they can't get in to see Barton. And he seems to think that's very strange. And then they talk about coming up with a plan to get back their old study files out of the basement records office. And then there are also pictures of Bill sitting and talking with Vivian, which they've never appeared in a scene together before. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how that will go, especially because, you know, if Vivian does go off the rails and Bill's known her so long, she might just be like, look, shit is happening, and I'm just going to tell you about it.
Yeah, and she looks like she has a broken arm or like she's hurt.
I mean, I'm sure she is. Like, Barton's a big guy, and she is a tiny lady.
That's true.
And I don't have anything else to say about Margaret and Barton necessarily, but I do want to talk a little about Bill and Barton at the beginning of the episode.
Okay.
I just thought it was telling, especially when Barton woke up from the electroshock treatment. You know, obviously the 2 of them are very close, and Bill put himself in a very emotionally uncomfortable place just by going to witness the treatment, never mind, you know, having to really soothe Barton after he wakes up just disoriented and terrified. But the thing that I noticed was that Bill, even though he still has that professional detachment and that purposeful distance, he's more fatherly with Barton than he is with his own child, because, you know, Barton throws up on him, and Bill is, you know, just sort of patting his mouth with a handkerchief. And
he even says, well, it's just a suit. He's so kind to Barton there, because Bill is so attached to his suits. Like, with anyone else, he'd just completely fly off the handle, probably. But he's so nice, and it's a huge turnaround, because Bill is such a villain, he's such an anti-hero asshole, and here he's just nice.
And I think, too, you know, it's an interesting parallel between how terrified Bill is to interact with his own child, to think that he does not have that type of niceness and kindness in him, when obviously he does, you know, for the people who have, this is going to sound completely wrong as I'm saying it, but, you know, Barton obviously has proven himself to be there for Bill and to actually have Bill's best interest in mind most of the time, even when I would say their worldviews conflict.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
So, do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I completely agree. You're absolutely right.
But yeah, so obviously, you know, it's not going to work that way with everyone, but because Barton has proven to be so consistently on Bill's side and wanting what is best for him, I think Bill thinks of him as like a safe person to express feelings to. You
seem to be saying that Bill can be kind. I think Bill can be kind to 2 types of people: complete and utter strangers, his patients, and people who have truly proven themselves, like, through a trial by fire, which unfortunately does not include Libby, because I think Libby falls in a weird in-between space.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that he can never really get it right with the people that he claims to love or, you know, to really care about, especially women, because there's always that, like, weird factor of, well, I don't want you to see me vulnerable, but you have to, and we have to forge this connection, but I don't want it. And I don't know.
Woe betide the woman that Bill Masters claims that he's in love with, because you're screwed. You are monumentally doomed.
You are.
Well, should we move on to Bill and Ginny's conversation in the hotel?
Let's move on.
So, Bill and Ginny have sex on the night that Libby gives birth to their first child, and it's the next night, and Libby's probably, it's the 1950s. Libby's probably still in the hospital. She will be for about, another week or 2 weeks. And what does Bill do? He drives out of town to meet his mistress in a hotel. Father of the Year award. Good Christ. On my first watch of this, I think I kind of sided with Bill when he turned, not sided with him, but I sympathized in a way with his need to turn the tables on Ginny and to kind of reflexively, people have been saying this, minimize her ability to hurt him by detaching himself.
Right.
But on second watch, it really stood out just how horrible both of them were being to each other. Ginny was totally inadvertent. She didn't mean to hurt him. She was just being herself, her unable to be romantically attached self, and Bill was being horrible because he was very hurt. So it really strikes how unbalanced and how they're never quite on the same page, even when they both think they are.
Yeah, I think it really did showcase just, they like to believe they have this intrinsic, amazing connection. And in some respects they do, on good days. But then on the worst days, it's like they try to reforge that connection and to really make it mean something. And in that sense, just completely twists it. And I don't know, because right now I'm thinking of Ginny, when she first starts out saying it's not every man who would, let a woman give up love instead of work. And I think in her own way, she's trying to, be a little bit complimentary of Bill, as in, you're the winner here. Like, obviously I'm not with Ethan, but at the same time, it's also a little subtle dig and, trying to protect herself by saying this is about the work. It's about something greater than just, having an affair. And that just wounds Bill to a point where he, like you said, just pulls back out of reflex.
And it's even amazing right before that, there's this operatic high on Bill's face when he says, I really need to apologize for just showing up on your doorstep last night. He apologizes for showing up on everybody's doorstep in this episode. And Ginny says, oh, you don't need to apologize. And he just flushes red and just has this brilliant, unsuppressed smile on his face, and he's so happy, and then she completely just pile drives him, just awful.
We mentioned, talking about last season, how any relationship between Bill and Ginny is going to be on Bill's terms, and it's reinforced in this conversation when he says, I want you to make sure you understand, I don't want you to feel led on. He has to be the one to dictate these rules, and it can't be Ginny.
They both know that they're lying to each other. Do you think Ginny is more disappointed by the fact that he so willingly latches on to her life raft, the life raft that she throws him? Or is she kind of disappointed that it turns out that Bill is essentially Ethan all over again, yet another man who is obsessed with her, and she doesn't reciprocate the exact same level of feelings? Where does the hurt and the upset that she expresses really lie? I thought, once again, it's Ginny being ambiguous and opaque.
See, I don't necessarily think that she assumed it was another Ethan situation, because, while there are similarities, and while this time there is Bill sort of making sure that she knows there's that distance between them, it's not an affair, it's not love, we're just continuing the study. But I think it reflects some of the feelings she doesn't like to admit that she has for Bill, because, she is disappointed. She wanted him to, I don't know if side with her is the correct way to put this, but, she wanted him to make some sort of tiny gesture to reassure her, it's not just you, we're both here. And then instead, when she gives him the out, knowing that he's going to take it, it's just another thing that she can just file away as well, That's just Bill for you.
I'm going to pick up on what you said, Bill siding with her, because she gives him an out, like you say, but he turns it around on her. He makes it seem like it's her fault they're in this quagmire in the first place. Like, oh, I don't want you to misunderstand this because, you're totally wrong about all of this. As opposed to, no, you're completely right. We're absolutely in the work together. Like, it's the way he frames it. It's this very, oh, you're wrong and I'm right here. And it's very, this is your problem, Ginny. You are the problem.
Yeah, I think if he had phrased it in any sort of capacity that would say, of course, like, we're linked to this, we're in this together, it is about the work, but it's also, just any sort of inkling that he wanted more from her than physiological data.
And it's so strange that he comes to her door late at night and says, I can't live without you, and they just both accept the lie that he comes up with. Like, there's no follow-up on this statement, like, I can't live without you. That is literally the closest you can possibly get to telling someone that you're madly in love with them without outright saying it. That just...
And I think, too, that's a stronger declaration than telling somebody that you love them, because, you can say, I love you, and, take it back or qualify it in some way, but you can't
It's very dramatic.
I can't live without you.
It's a very dramatic thing to say.
That's a statement you can't just toss around.
Mm-hmm.
Any more to say about this conversation in the hotel?
Just those tight, awful smiles that they both give each other. Just those really perfect masks that they morph into when they each realize that this is not, like, they're not on the same page and this is not what they thought it was going to be at all.
Their stupid professional faces.
I think Jenny's look of upset might be because it's kind of an, oh shit, we're right back to where we started and absolutely nothing has changed. We're just rehashing the same old story between us.
And that's, I think what would probably upset her most of all, because Ginny is someone who is always looking forward, not necessarily to the next best thing, but weighing the risks and hoping that they will, be worth the reward. And so obviously, Bill shows up on her doorstep saying, I can't live without you. And now all of a sudden they're back here. I think she's just sort of looking at it and going, this is something that has just not paid off really in the slightest.
So let's go ahead, and if you're ready, we can talk about just some one-off thoughts that didn't really fit into anything else. I had a few.
Yeah, why don't you go first?
Okay, so we really got confirmation this episode from Ginny's flashback to her conversation, and when we got the other side of the conversation with Ethan, he just, bam, he goes right into, are you in love with Bill? So we really got confirmation. This was a question we had in one of the previous podcasts. Ethan knew what was going on, or he really felt that his suspicions were confirmed, and Ginny tries to deny it, but he's willing to make it obvious that he's willing to bet on that being the situation. So there you go.
And I think too, Ginny's conversation with Jane later in the episode, that made me wonder how much Ethan had shared with Jane. Even though it's a shitty thing to do to get someone's friend to try and talk her back into re-accepting your proposal, which she never wanted to accept. I wonder how much Jane knew or was told or began to suspect on her own time, because she says to Ginny, supposedly in the context of the study, you've pinned your hopes on something that just can't be. And to me, that sounded like Jane throwing out the line, all right, let me tell you this vague platitude about hoping for things that aren't going to turn out well. It's definitely not about the study.
That is interesting, because she does come back to, Dr. Masters is gone. The study is over with. Let go of it. Move on, girl.
And so, I think that was maybe as close as Jane was getting to say, look, I suspect some things. I've been told some things I can't verify, but if this is happening the way I think it's happening, you in danger, girl.
Yeah. Going on with Ginny having lunch with Jane, one thing I noticed, and I really sincerely hope that this was deliberate. So Jane says, the study is over. That part of your life is over. It can't always be about the sex and the study. Dr. Masters is gone. And Ginny kind of laughs to herself. And there's this angled shot from the side, and she's sitting on the bench, and she has a Coke bottle between her knees, and she has her hand on it, and she kind of moves her fingers up and down, and it's this incredibly phallic imagery all of a sudden. And I like to think that the directors of these episodes just like to throw in little Easter eggs, like here's Ginny, she has a penis now.
Just in case you missed what she's thinking about, we'll just put it out there.
There it is. And then the only other one that I had was Bill's fantastic conversation with Dr. Greathouse over the phone, where he is clearly barely putting up with Doug's vagina jokes. And then he says "sí," yes, like he has a little bit of Spanish in there because he's so just he wishes he were dead right now. Did you have any?
I especially liked that. When Bill puts on the music to drown out the baby crying, he chooses an Everly Brothers record.
That seemed like a very Libby record to buy, because she had that fascination with watching Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show last season.
Yeah, I would 100% believe that Libby bought that record.
Like, Bill seems like he just likes classical music or like nothing, just total silence.
Yeah, Bill doesn't seem like a music person to me, so I think maybe Libby in her pregnancy was like, let's listen to something cheerful for the baby.
Yeah. Oh, I did notice, if you think about the exact chronology of the episode, if you think about current day, like on the most recent day of this episode, both Bill and Ginny try to go to their respective mentors, I guess their current mentors, for advice and kind of life help. Bill is unsuccessful because he's blocked from seeing Barton, but Ginny has a long conversation with Lillian about the future and about decisions. And so they're both sort of facing the same issues, and they both sort of do the same thing at the same time. There's a very strong parallel between their days.
I did not think about that.
That's what comes from putting together the chronology.
Meanwhile, I was only looking for people crying, so
meanwhile,
two for two.
I was just watching the gifs of them having sex on repeat for several hours on end. Sorry, not sorry. Do we want to move on to our thoughts about the previews for the season and what's going to happen in season 2 or episode 2?
Yes.
Just talk for a little bit about this.
I can't wait to see Bill stuff an egg roll in someone's face.
That's going to be exciting. I'm going to be stoked for that.
We don't think Bill's going to last very long at Memorial just because the sketchy, pervert nature of Doug Greathouse is just going to backfire very badly with Bill and his very strict professional ways.
I'm kind of hoping that, I think Ginny will find out that he's gotten fired from Memorial Hospital for starting a fist fight with the head of his department. And I think he'll play it, because I think it will really be rooted in the fact that Doug Greathouse is going to treat the study like a place to hold a frat party and invite the boys over to watch some poor girl, masturbate. But I think Ginny, I'm hoping anyway, Ginny interprets it as, because there seems to be this point of contention between the two of them. And not only does Ginny seem to be second-guessing her decision, the possibility of getting back together with Bill on a professional level, I think it could be the catalyst. If she interprets his firing as purposeful to secure a place for her by his side, I think we're open to another one of these situations where Bill doubles down on the idea of Ginny, absolutely necessary to the study, and Ginny responds by doubling down on their, I guess, sexual relationship.
That would be an interesting tack.
Because it's one that they've done before. It's happened before, and commenters have noted that it happens a lot.
When I think, too, it's almost like a sort of strange reward system, like as messed up as that sounds, but it's like every time Bill has really either come to his wit's end and just completely boned out, and Virginia has had to help him get to a different and usually better place, or for whatever reason he just is doing very well and in his generosity wants to help Virginia do well too. I think every time that happens, it's that weird reward system where, he's happy and then she's happy, but they can't be happy together. Something always goes wrong in the execution of, let me show you emotional intimacy. Oh no, wait, I am broken.
Well, and I'm hoping I think it would be a good setup and a strong segue into episode 3, because in this hypothetical scenario, Libby is obviously going to, as we've seen in the previews, she's going to completely flip her shit on him. You know, why are you doing this to me? Why are you going, is this how it's going to be? Are you just going to go around getting fired from places for the rest of our lives? Her reaction is going to be very bad because she's thinking about the situation one way. If Ginny reacts favorably, that leads into what we've heard about episode 3. It's a one-act play about Bill and Ginny alone in a hotel room the whole time. And they're completely upfront and honest with each other about their pasts. And I think it could be a good switch up in a way. So instead of her just being like, oh, thank you so much, and like having sex with him, it could be a different level of, not rewards, because I hate thinking of it as a reward system, but a different advancement in their relationship.
No, I think that would be an interesting change, and at least for the moment, a more positive one, because it's much better to have them, go through like a good place and a bad place, and then return to a place where, they're both making demands on each other that should have been made initially, so...
Yeah, and I think episode 2 is really going to see Ginny wielding the power that she knows she has over him.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I think that's it, honestly.
All right, this episode has wound down. That's going to conclude this podcast for us. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.
As always, if you've got any questions for us or want to send us anything, you know the Tumblr handle.
Very true. All right, bye.
Bye.